Hello, welcome to TANTV Talks. This is a platform where we discuss subjects that matter. My name is Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. I am the host of Danfo Conversations, which is a show that will be coming to you on TANTV every week. Last episode, we had 3 guests from Nigeria, all of whom between them have around 60 years experience in feminist activism and the SGBP, sexual gender-based violence space. I have those guests back with me again, and let me introduce them. We have Ms. Ioma Obebe. Ioma is an activist, feminist, who has worked in the field for 30 years. Ioma is also the Executive Director of Alliances for Africa, which is based in Nigeria. We also have Ms. Buki Williams. Bukola Williams is the Executive Director of Education as a Vaccine, an organization that works with young people to advance their rights to health and protection from all forms of violence. And we have with us again, Ms. Zina Mohammed. Zina is the Executive Director of TEARS. She's a lawyer, she's a feminist, and she's worked in this space for several years also. Ladies, welcome back and thank you for joining me again.
Thanks for having us.
Right, so on the last episode, we kind of discussed the state of things in Nigeria 10 years back, and we moved a little bit forward. Now, I want to expand the conversation a little bit more. And I want to expand and bring it home to things that have happened more recently. Now, I know for some years now, women like you and other activists have been pushing for the government of Nigeria to declare a state of emergency. That demand has since gotten louder, and it would appear that government are now going to be adopting it. What does a state of emergency mean for us, Buki? In Nigeria, what does it mean?
I think right now, the truth of the matter is, yes, we had been asking for a state of emergency in different ways and pushing for it. But I think COVID-19 really was what, kind of broke the camel's back in a sense of us realizing that reporting of violence had been increasing. And the heartbreaking thing about it was that there were just few services that were available for those who were reporting. So there were a few organizations like TEARS, some of us, Alliances for Africa, us, and Dorothy Njamanze Foundation. There was just really not an understanding in Nigeria that we needed to be prepared for this, the way we were prepared for the pandemic itself. And so all of these cases kept coming up, and we kept saying, what is going on? Who's doing what? Realizing we don't have enough laws, realizing we don't have enough SARCs, realizing the police is saying our only job is to enforce the lockdown, not to address cases of gender-based violence. Essential workers were, section gender-based violence providers were not considered essential workers. It was insane. And then I think in the beginning of June, a case came up. Uwaila or Mozua in Edo State. She had gone to church to study, and she was raped and beaten, and she died in the hospital. And I think that just was just demoralizing for so many of us, like looking at this young woman and thinking she could go to somewhere that's considered safe, even though many of us know churches are not safe. COVID reminded us that homes were not safe. And nobody was protected. And so that for us was just kind of like, we need a state of emergency. You can't keep hiding that we're working, on the pandemic, we're trying to handle it. You have haphazard lack of coordinated data you couldn't find. All of these things to really be able to say, this is what we needed to do. So for us, we said, there needed to be a state of emergency. And there was a loud outcry for it. There were people who were saying they were tired. And we just had very specific asks, right? We don't just want the declaration like the governors did. We said, you need to domesticate the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act and the Child Rights Act that provides protection. You need to create, a system of support services that are fully funded and sustainable right? In the long term, we want to make sure that, you know, cases can be prosecuted. So if there are police and officials who are refusing to prosecute those cases, there should be disciplinary measures against them, you know. So it's not just that you can just pretend that, oh, you know, I don't want to do anything, but also just like critical for there to be money for it. So it's not just a state of emergency just for the sake of state of emergency, but that there should be critical steps that should be taken to ensure that sexual and gender-based violence is prioritized, is considered essential, and it's funded.
Excellent. Hilma, do you think or do you believe that the Nigerian government and the Nigerian society in general is ready to actually embrace such a demand? Yes, government might now be listening, but is the society and government ready to do the work that is going to be required for a real declaration of state of emergency?
I think the political will is not as holistic as one would want or expect, with the exception of a few states where the governor, his wife, and those in his cabinet are interested. In many states, the demands of a state of emergency means that there's very little money for them to chop. And therefore, diverting that money to a state of emergency. And because you see, if they acknowledge the state of emergency, it means funding health, funding a sexual assault referral center, making sure that the Ministry of Justice has adequate money to prosecute and to put into jail those that, you know, make people accountable. So on the one hand, the state of emergency, they've you know, demonstrated, okay, we may be interested, but the long-term political will is lacking because it does mean that there may not be enough money for them to put in their pockets. It means that a budgetary line for a sexual assault referral center and make sure that the doctors are there and make sure the nurses are there and that we've got trained counselors to counsel people.
Yeah, and Buki, that was one of the things I was also going to ask is, this is going to be expensive. Are the government ready to spend on this declaration?
I mean, they're never ready to spend. That's just the truth. They're never ready to spend. We know for most of, you know, our governments and this new neoliberal consensus of saying that, you know, everything is focused on, you know, building the economy, having higher GDP, in which the indices of success of a developed economy is to say that we're wealthy, not about the fact that your citizens are able to have a high standard of life, have access to healthcare, have access to sanitation, are able to feed themselves, you know, are able to live lives in peace and be able to create a better life for their children. That's not our indices of success. We are so sold on being like, we want to, you know, be developed, and then, you know, people are living in poverty. And so for me, they're never ready to spend. That is literally our job as advocates, is to say that we know you don't want to spend, but you will spend. Because we're even seeing now, we're seeing cuts, you know, to funding for the health sector. We're seeing cuts to funding for education, which are all critical part of creating a society in which is going to be less violence. Because we know part of the insecurity is that what is done is that then the violence of that insecurity is being carried out on women's bodies. You know, they will say, oh, a man is poor and he's stressed out, so next thing he's going to beat his wife. Like, I mean, like, all of those things, women bear the brunt of it. So they're never ready to spend. So our thing is to say, like, look, we know you're saying you don't have enough money, but you still are spending a lot of money on security. So this needs to be included in there. You know, you need health services. You need to include this in there. So basically our big push is that you're going to tell us you don't have, and we're going to show you that you do have. So you have to spend.
Hilma, I read stats from the Minister of Women's Affairs, where I think it was this week, where she said 3,600 rape cases were reported
Yes.
during the lockdown. Now, I'm not even sure.
Yes.
The story didn't say whether it was just during the full lockdown or since, that full lockdown and, the last 3 months and stuff. And Buki also mentioned about the issues that advocates and, first responders, which are advocates when it comes to issues of gender-based violence, the issues they were having. Do you think the government was in any way, did they add SGBP into the sort of their plan? Because a lot of countries have criticized their government saying, even the UK say, look, you forgot us. We're part of the first responders, we're an emergency service. Now we've had 3,600 plus rapes reported. Could that have been avoided if, people like yourselves and other advocates had been added as, first responders? Sorry, Ilma.
I think it could have been avoided to a certain degree. I think the fact that the likes of EVA, Alliances for Africa, and a number of others were not added as essential services made the provision of frontline services very difficult for victims. What then happened was that the mechanism for the referral pathway completely broke down. So from the time the victim called that she needed help or she'd been raped, all the preceding processes failed. The police stations were closed. The hospitals were not taking anybody because of COVID. She couldn't get any post-rape drug, what is it called? Prophylaxis? Yes. She couldn't get access to it. The whole system failed. The mechanism itself, the pathway completely collapsed. And it took a lot of effort for individual organizations to begin to navigate their way through that. However, the one state where it didn't fail completely was Lagos State. And that's because they took their referral pathway online. And then they gave a certain number of NGOs essential services badges. So they actually had some service online, and certain police stations were available for people to come and report to. But that's one state in 36 states.
Yes,
do you understand?
Indeed.
There's 36 states of the federation. One state got it right. And even then it wasn't 100%, but they were better than the other states. In Imo State, it was a complete failure.
Azina, thank you, Yoma. Azina, what would a successful implementation of state of emergency against SGBV in Nigeria, what would Nigeria look like after such a declaration and implementation had been successful? What would we expect to see?
In an ideal world, if we were successful and a state of emergency was indeed declared in all of the states of the Federation and the government took implementation serious, we would see a society where victims and survivors had confidence in the system, where they would approach the systems that have been put in place to seek for redress. We will see a state where perpetrators are afraid, where there is deterrent for actions before they take place, and certain knowledge that justice will be rained down when those actions do take place, right? It would be a society that prioritized needs of everyone. The needs of people with disability, the needs of people who identify as LGBT, the needs of people who are at the margins of society, people who live in informal settlements, people who aren't the 1% with means, right? That would be a situation where Because again, one of the things that happened is that big famous people have gotten away with different kinds of violences, both the ones that were recorded and the ones that were not, the ones that had witnesses alive till date and the ones who had witnesses who wouldn't speak up. But also, even the regular Joe on the street could get away with all of the crimes that they committed. So women as a whole, for a successful state of emergency, an execution to look like, we would have the justice system on board, where justice is swift, not slow. We have courts that were deliberately, just like we have traffic courts, we've prioritized traffic, but not the lives of women, right? Where we have special courts that accelerate cases and women are able to get the justice that they need. Where there are spaces just for women to be able to also just access mental health services, access healing, right? So all of the things that activists and advocates have been speaking about for years, when they come into effect, that would be when we know that we've had a successful state of emergency in its execution.
Okay, excellent, thank you. So I'm going to move slightly to a big issue, and it's an issue that affects all of us, human rights. And in particular this time, I want to talk about LGBT and the vulnerable human rights. So often when Western media talk about Nigeria, or they mention, you know, or they give, if you like, they kind of give on their website, you know, advice about Nigeria. The first thing they say is that Nigeria is a country where homosexuality is against the law. Yet, we know there's a film that's coming out, which we're excited about, by Pamela Hadi, who herself is an LGBT advocate. Now, I also think back to the film Walking with Shadows, which received lots and lots of applause. So tell me, what is the real state, Azina, of the LGBT populace in Nigeria? What is the real state of LGBT rights?
That's a really multi-layered question, right?
That's why I asked you.
Again, the state of LGBT organizing is better than it's been in the past. Before the passage of the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act in 2014, we had about 12 to 14 organizations working on LGBT rights. As at last count in 2020, we have over 35. So there's been more than 100% increase in the number of people who work on LGBT issues in the country, right? Before the passage of the law in 2014, I think Nigeria polled, due to the Pew research that was done in 2013, as the most homophobic country in the world, where over 98% of people said that LGBT people did not deserve basic rights to healthcare, rights to education, protection of the law, public transportation, just those basic rights. 98% of Nigerians believe that LGBT people did not deserve that. So forward till 2019, 2020, the number has gone down significantly. Also, the support for the SSMPA has significantly gone down. As at last count, about 30% of individuals who were polled said that they would accept a family member or friend who identified as LGBT. In the grand scheme of things, right, that's still 70% of Nigerians who will not accept an LGBT family member or friend. But that's a huge shift in 6 years, right? So state of organizing is slightly better, where the mention of LGBT used to be taboo in the past. Now it's discussed in many places. It might be derogatory sometimes, but many times it's positive. People will check you or call you out for your homophobia or your transphobia, and there's more of an acceptance that LGBT people exist, have always existed, and there's a pushback. So that is the state of organizing. As to life of an LGBT person in Nigeria, that's also, it's contextual, right? It really depends on your social class, because again, people who live in urban centers, Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, Calabar, we have a lot more freedom than people who don't live in these cities, right? Where in a place like Lagos, I can go to a place with my girlfriend, hold hands, be on an obvious date, and nobody would blink. And there are places that are known as gay-friendly bars, gay-friendly organizations, safe spaces, and things like that. Nobody has access to that. Also, when it comes to harassment that LGBT people face most of the time, say, for example, it happens in public transport. If you have money to have your own car, you're unlikely to face that kind of harassment. If you can afford an Uber, you're less likely to be harassed in public transport. Going to supermarkets will be the difference between how people will catcall you and attack you in public to people who would go to the market, for instance, in Oniru. So class plays a big difference in how you experience or don't experience discrimination in Nigeria. And this is not just for LGBT people. It's for many people who fall in the margins and also for regular Nigerians. Your entire experience of Nigeria is different depending on your social class. So it's the same with people who are LGBT. If a foreigner who was LGBT was in Nigeria, they would not know that they were in a homophobic country because they're least likely to be in places where that would ever be an issue. So
Okay, thank you. Buki, so there's been a change with regards to how Nigerians feel about, LGBT. What do you think is driving that change?
Wow, I mean, I think it's a lot of things. I think media is really big one, because when you talk to Azina, I think that's one of the things. It's media is really significant because you're seeing their stories and you kind of realize that you're going through the same things in life, right? Love, because often I think when people think about LGBT, of course they think about thunder and brimstone, but then they also reduce them to like their sexual, orientation, right? So just think like, hi, people having, but when you are able to go beyond that, to see them as a person who's a sister, who's a friend, who, is your relative, who's somebody who's going through heartbreak like you're going through, who's trying to get their career off the ground like they're going through, who is interesting and is more than this thing that you reduce them to. I think that's changing that. Seeing that displayed in media, I mean, it's fascinating to me right now because there's a platform called Zikoko. And he's sharing different diaries, relationships, things like that. And they share the stories and you could see people just be like, that's interesting, or that's relatable. And you're just seeing that difference. I think media plays a critical role. But then also, I think there's also been in different circles. Like Azina said, this is also like a social class circle, but really interesting, right? Because there's also the conversation around, what happened, pre-colonialism, right? In understanding gender identity and sexual orientation. There might be some who are being like, well, being very reductive, but I've also been part of conversations in which, there's this conversations around these things existed in our society. Maybe they weren't completely welcomed, but they were understood and people knew it. And you minded your business. As long as it wasn't affecting you, you faced your front. And live and let live in those kind of things. So I think there's been actually a shift before you saw the same-sex marriage act, where it was kind of like, wait, are we not going that far? Like, what happened? But you knew that was just not in Nigeria. That was like a global move of just religious fundamentalism that was happening, the growth of Pentecostalism in Nigeria and all of those things, in which all of a sudden it was more about the performance of religion rather than just being a good person. So I think those kind of things definitely had an impact. And of course, I can't take away organizing being done by LGBTQI activists. I mean, that's very, very critical. They're like the backbone of that.
Excellent, thank you. Hioma, so let me move us because we've only got a few minutes left. I'm gonna ask all three of you. I'm gonna start with Hioma. If there's one thing, if the Nigerian government said to you as an advocate, pick one thing that we could implement tomorrow that would change the SGBV landscape and human rights in general, what's the one thing you would ask for?
Prosecution.
One, prosecution. Excellent. Thank you. Buki.
Hey, just one? I can't. That's so impossible. There's so much. But I think for me, I would actually ask adequate services. I want to see professional counseling. I want to see medical services that when somebody, is violated, is raped, they can go to a hospital and get proper services. I want,
You get one bouquet.
okay, so just services that exist to respond. That's what I would want. Yes.
Excellent. Azina, what's the one thing you would ask for? They can implement it tomorrow.
I would like a one-stop shop, just as Bukia said. I want everything to be housed in one place where people can access a rape kit and people who know how to process a rape kit, so that even if today's Nigeria does not have the ability to prosecute people, it can be done in the future, because those things would live. So I want a one-stop shop where victims can get help, where there will be prosecutors with trainings who can take on those cases and go ahead and prosecute them.
Excellent. Now, to round up, because I would like us to round up, if you like, on a positive, or perhaps maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. So if I say to you, what does the future look like? I'm going to give you have negative or positive. Here on what does the future look like of LGBT and SGBV and the general landscape of vulnerable people in Nigeria? What does the future look like? Positive or negative?
Positive.
Okay.
I'm going to say positive because while we in this work, we can't do this work in vain.
Exactly.
So it's definitely has to be positive. We're doing progress here.
Azina?
I agree, it's positive. I mean, for an out LGBT person to be out and about in Nigeria and publicly speak about my experience is something I did not think would exist today. And I'm looking forward to more of it, with more people taking up space and just doing things.
Excellent. Ladies, thank you so very much. Riveting, engaging, compelling, educational even conversation. Thank you so much for giving up your time. That's the end of another topic of Danfo Conversations. Join us again on the next episode, where I will be with 2, maybe 3 guests from the Nigerian diaspora, or even from at home, who will be telling us about what's going on at home and the work they're doing. Thank you very much. My name is Ireti Bakare-Yusuf. Bye-bye.
The coronavirus has affected the African American community in many ways, including a drastic drop in blood donations. This is the time to take care of one another, and blood transfusions from healthy African American donors can be a life-saving treatment for patients with sickle cell disease or cancer. The American Red Cross adheres to the highest standards of safety and infection control and urges you to come out to donate. Please, make an appointment today at redcrossblood.org.
This is my house. My parents helped build it. Now we don't get wet when it rains. I don't get too hot or too cold inside. And I don't have to worry when the winds blow. This is my house.
This is my house. This is my house. This is my house. My house. My house.
I can play with my sister. I can play with my brother. I can play with my mother, my father, my family.
My family. My family. This is my house. This is my house.
I can study. I can be safe with my family. This is my house.
This is my house. This is my house. This is my house.
My house.
My house.
This is my house.
Visit Habitat.org to find out how you can help more families like mine have a safe, decent place to call home.
Things could be stranger, but I don't know how.